Hi, today we're going to look at Collabnet Subversion Edge. Collabnet Subversion Edge is a software that you can use to go ahead and do source control. Now, what source control means is basically if you have a project and you're developing software, then you always need to go ahead and make sure that you have the ability to track different versions of the code so that you can always go ahead and backtrack, as well as basically allow different people to work with the source code at the same time, maybe on the same piece of software or same logic, but different functionality. For this purposes, it's important that one person does not overwrite another person's changes, while at the same time being able to keep track of who did what change and how that change needs to be merged or tracked, in terms of being able to make sure that the end result or the final piece of code works as expected. For this purposes, you have many different pieces of software that you can use, one of the most common being Team Foundation Server by Microsoft. Again, Team Foundation Server from Microsoft is a paid software, so many startup companies or small organizations prefer to use many of the open source solutions out there. One of these open source solutions is Collabnet Subversion Edge. This is actually a packaged version of the software which uses SVN, the underlying open source code base for source control. Collabnet, basically what they've done is that they've completed the entire stack, saying what is the minimum requirement as far as software is concerned, what do you need to install, how does it need to be configured in order for source control to work properly. And this certified stack of software that's known to be compatible with each other and the build of the software called SVN is what they have released as Collabnet Subversion Edge. The idea here being that with Collabnet Subversion Edge, you don't really need to know Apache, Python, SVN, how to compile. It's all done as a prerequisite for you, and all you need to do is install and configure it based on your individual requirement. Therefore, there's really not much of a development or a real requirement in terms of understanding the skill set or understanding how to configure and work with these files. So let's go ahead and install Collabnet. As you can see, I've already downloaded the software. You can go to the Collabnet website and download Collabnet. It's again free for use, but you do need to register on the site. When you double click, you'll obviously get this screen, and you need to go ahead and press run, at which point you should see this screen. If you go ahead and press next, it'll ask you to go ahead and download the Java runtime if you don't already have it. And if that's already done, it'll go ahead and just start the installation automatically. It might take a few minutes to go ahead and do this, so I'm just going to go ahead and wait while this happens. As you can see, you should see something like this. This is the screen to install Java. Again, most of it is open source, so as you can see, it's installing Java. The good thing about Collabnet SVN is that a lot of the stuff that you would need to do in terms of maintaining this environment and maintaining Collabnet is automated, and the downloads for updates, whether it's Apache, whether it's Python, or any of the other software that you would be using, is done or configurable very easily from within the administrative interface. Now, traditionally, they do have a software inbuilt so that you can navigate the repository, but you might want to consider using some other software just for the ease of use factor. Now, let me go ahead and just close this right now, and the installation is obviously progressing, so it's going to take a few more minutes while it sets things up. Collabnet, you obviously get this screen where you're getting the Subversion Edge setup, so you click next, give it a location, so you can see here it's got C:\CSVN. You press install. So the prerequisites for installing Collabnet is done, and we're actually installing the software right now. Again, this could take a couple of seconds, so you just need to go ahead and wait it out. So when it's done, you'll see that you get this particular screen, and it'll ask you if you want to go ahead and launch the Subversion interface. Now, as you can see, you'll get a link, and the default username password for Subversion is admin. So if you just go ahead and click on this, it'll redirect you to the URL from where you can administer or configure Subversion. As you can see here now, I've got the Subversion URL, so I'll just go ahead and put in the username and password and press sign in. And the first thing you'll see is that obviously at this point Subversion is down because nothing has been installed or configured. So let me go ahead and do that first. Some of the key areas that you want to focus on this particular screen is that you're logged in as a super administrator at the moment, and as far as you are concerned, for the most part you'd be using the administration, user and repository links on the top. So when you click administration, you'll see that you got the status of Subversion and some very generic information about what's being done at the moment. In addition to this, you've got the server log that you can use to monitor the health of the server and things that are going on. You also have new packages and install packages, and you can go ahead and download and install updates for this stack of software. Statistics is basically just giving you information about how Subversion is behaving on your network at the moment and disk usage. So it's again something that you would want to monitor if you're managing, or the Subversion instance that you have is being used by a very large enterprise development team. The jobs that you have here is basically things that you can configure. We'll go ahead and look at it when we do repositories as well. Some of the most frequent jobs that you will be using is for backups as well as housekeeping. As you can see here, we've also got server settings, and the server setting is mainly used so that you can go ahead and configure the environment. One of the more common things that you'll be changing here is the host name, the port number, the location of the repositories, the database. The IP it's identifying automatically, but if you do have a static IP or a specific IP that you want to configure for, that's something that you can go ahead and do as well. You can also go ahead and choose the network interface, and at this moment you can give the administrator a name. Say for example, I'm going to give my name and I'm going to give my email ID. The reason I would do this is because I want to go ahead and make sure that if I'm going to do any administrative work, I need to be able to communicate that to everybody else. And one of the email IDs that I would be using is this one. Also for password reset and other things, you would want to go ahead and use this as well. Should you need the requirement where source code is being passed over the network, you can also go ahead and encrypt the connection and make sure that all transfers are encrypted. So this is how you want to go ahead and configure the administrative console for SVN or Collabnet Subversion Edge. As far as authentication goes, one of the good things with Subversion is that it does support Windows authentication, so you can go ahead and populate your LDAP directory details, and that will go ahead and make sure that all users can use their Windows login to directly check in code. Otherwise, you'd need to configure users via this screen and give them a username password, and they would need to type in this username password when they're trying to connect to Subversion and check in code, just like what we did here when we logged in using administrator username and password. You'll also maybe want to make it consistent by converting usernames into small case or uppercase depending on what the requirement is, just so that these things are considered and that case sensitivity doesn't become too much of a factor. As you can see here, we have proxy configuration as well. You'd normally want to go ahead and use this if you're trying to expose Subversion over an internet or intranet and you want people to be able to connect remotely as well. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm basically just going to leave this blank because I would be using Subversion directly on the same laptop where it's installed. It might not seem like a great idea because ultimately if the hard disk does crash, I would lose both Subversion code as well as the data that's directly hosted on my system. So for most purposes, you would need to go ahead and configure a proxy server port number and a username, password and a host name in order to be able to connect and configure Subversion remotely as well. Automatic updates and things like that, basically internet access is what you would want to be worried about here. Also, you have the ability to go ahead and configure an email so that you can send user emails, invites, password resets, things like that via a Subversion dedicated email address. The logging, as you can see, is again very straightforward. You got a housekeeping ability in order to indicate how many files you want to keep in your repository to track events that are going on, and for the most part the console level is warnings. You can go ahead and use this if you ever feel that you need to go ahead and monitor additional events as well. Other than this, the next thing that you want to look at is basically users. As you can see here, I've just got an administrative user, and that's the only login or user that you would get initially. In addition to this, you can also see that there are different types of admin roles. The idea with the role is that you can go ahead and configure some people as administrators who are pretty much able to do anything that they want within Subversion. You also have a user role, which is basically a person who's allowed to check in code into a repository in Subversion. And then you have role administrator for system, and then you got repository administrators in case you have multiple users, and one of them is going to be responsible for managing a particular repository. The good thing about Subversion is that you can install one version of Subversion and then have multiple different development projects going on parallelly, each with their own repository and each with dedicated user access. It's always a good idea to go ahead and configure at least 2 full remote role admins and 1 repository admin per project or per repository. Hooks are basically scripts that you can execute as part of a pre-check-in or post-check-in validation, sometimes just to make sure that you might want to make sure that every code that's being checked in has some kind of comment against it, so you can quickly identify what the change is about. For those things, you can create something called hooks, and the hooks will go ahead and do these validations for you whenever code is being imported or exported out of Subversion. So once you've identified the roles, the next thing that you'd probably want to do is create a user. If you click the create button on the bottom right corner of that screen, you would go ahead and then type in a username, and you can just go ahead and type in the details for that user. And for the purpose of this particular demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a normal user role permission as well as an administrator for a repository, so that I can go ahead and create my own repositories. At this point, the user has been created, and as you can see, it's successfully created with the 2 permissions that I wanted. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and configure a repository, or basically a piece of area on the hard disk where you can check in code for this particular development project that you're creating. So let's go ahead and press the create button here, and I'll say sample repository, and at this moment I'm gonna go ahead and just create using the standard template. So you can see that I've got a standard template that will create 3 main folders, which is a trunk, branch, and tag structure. You can also go ahead and create an empty repository, in which case it'll just be a folder, and then you would need to go ahead and configure it on your own. Also, you can go ahead and pick up a repository or restore a repository using the backup, as you see here. So let's go ahead and just create a standard repository. And once that's done, you'll see that the repository is done. It's okay. At the moment, there's no data being collected, and you get some very standard basic information in addition to certain template files that you have here. These are basically the hook files that I was mentioning earlier, and are required in order to basically validate what kind of operations are allowed or not allowed on this particular instance. The next thing that you want to do is configure the access rules. As you can see here right now, we've got everybody having read-write access. As you can see here, this is an example of how you can allow a person to go ahead and access a particular folder within the repository. As you can see, pretty much everybody can read, but Alice and Bob can read and write as well. All you need to do is edit the file and copy this information over, at which point you will be able to go ahead and configure SVN to give Alice and Bob read and write permissions. So in this particular example, what I would want to do is I want to go ahead and grant myself Giant, which is my username, equal to read and write, because again I'm the administrator. So I just come here, type in Giant equal to RW, and that's pretty much it as far as granting permissions are concerned. So you can see that it's been saved successfully. The next thing is the backup schedule, and it's very self-explanatory as far as how you want to configure the backups. All you need to do is specify the number of backups that you want to create, and then you can specify deltas if you're dealing with very large backups, the type of backups that you have here, and the schedule under which the backups need to be taken. The last thing is basically templates, and you can use a template if you're interested in trying to make sure that every repository has a specific predefined set of files available in them. For example, this particular template says that you'll always go ahead and have a very standard template in terms of the 3 folders that need to be created. So this is all really that you need to do as far as configuring Subversion is concerned. And as you can see, we've created a repository and we've created users and we've got administration running. Now that everything is running, if you go ahead and start Subversion, okay, so I've got a problem here because the port number is already being used, so I need to go ahead and change that. So I'm going to make this 8084 and then save that. And you can see now Subversion is up and running, and these are the location of my repository. So if I go ahead and click on this, it'll open up Subversion and say this is where your data is stored. With this, we've gone ahead and configured Subversion, Collabnet, Edge, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.